I think that's us live. So very good evening to everyone who's joining us on YouTube tonight for the fan-led review Q&A. I'd like to be joined by some Orient staff, some Orient board members, and as well as that, we've also got representation from Loft and the Leighton Orient Supporters Club. So with us tonight is Danny Macklin, Chief Exec, Jake Cook, Marketing Manager, Neil Taylor, Chief Exec of the Trust, Jonathan Kay, who's our Loft representative tonight, Karen Harrison, who is obviously Supporter Liaison Officer and representative from the Supporters Club. We've also got Chairman Nigel Travis, and we've also got Director Nick Samaka. So we're going to be going through plenty of questions tonight. We're also going to have a presentation from Nigel and Danny on the fan-led review, looking at essentially what it is, what it means to the club, what it can mean to football in general, and what you guys at home can do to help it be a success and hopefully a positive thing for Leighton Orient. So with that, we'll hand over to Danny, who will start the presentation.
Thank you very much there, Luke. So tonight is a really important junction. We've obviously spoke for a length of time regarding not just fair game, but also the Tracy Crouch report. So myself and Nigel, or rather Nigel and myself, are going to go through these slides. We'll try not to make it death by a PowerPoint. These will be available online shortly after this. And if you're watching it back, very much it'll be live now. We're going to hear from other people as well. And more importantly, we'll hear from your questions. But if there is anything that comes up after this, you know where we are. If there's any queries, concerns, observations, etc., we're all ears. So I'm going to now hand over to Nigel to truly kickstart us.
Sorry, I was on mute. Danny and Luke, are we going to put the slides up or just talk to them?
Did you have the slides, Danny, or did you want me to do it?
Can you do that, please? Yeah.
All right. While he's doing that, I'll kick off. So Danny and Luke has kind of introduced the subject. I see this as a very important meeting. And I'm pleased to say, I think you'll find as we go through this meeting that every major constituent of Leighton Orient are on the same page. The board, the executive team, the two fan groups that we have, which is Leighton Orient Supporters Club and also Loft. Just to remind you, and Jonathan will remind me if I get it wrong, but Loft was effectively set up to avoid disasters to Leighton Orient. We had a close disaster back in 2016-17. The net result was we ended up buying the club with our consortium. I, for one, are very happy we did that. And I think we're making good progress. But tonight's not really about Leighton Orient. Tonight is really about the national game. And when the slides come up, you'll see that it talks about the national game. This is the #1 game in the world. It's the game that we invented. And I think it's fair to say that it's become very prosperous and people view both the Premier League and the EFL around the world. The Premier League, which was established in '92, with the first chief executive being Rick Parry, who ironically is the current chairman of the EFL. He was the first CEO, as I said, of the league. He's seen what's happened. And over time, he and others have built the Premier League into being the most prosperous and popular league in the world. And I think the first key issue for you to note tonight is the amount of money that comes out of the Premier League has not been distributed effectively down the pyramid, as it's called. And I want to remind those who don't exactly know what the pyramid is. The pyramid in England actually has 13 levels, We happen to be at level 4. When we were in the National League, we were at level 5. So there's a lot below us. And just to demonstrate why it's important, we got Marvin Ekpatita out of, I think it was level 6 or 7. He came into level 5. He got promoted with us into level 4. And he's now doing extremely well in level 2 at Blackpool. And who knows, he may end up in level 1. That's the way the pyramid works. And the pyramid is the Premier League, the EFL, non-league and grassroots football. I think another couple of examples of how it's worked over time is we obviously had Harry Kane 10 years ago. Well, he's just over 10 years ago now, playing for us on loan. We all know he's the England captain and sponsor of Leyton Orient now. And Jamie Vardy is another one who was playing his trade in non-league football with Fleetwood Town. And he's gone on to win the Premier League. Moving on to the second slide, which you can't see because Luke's still trying to get it set up. The game is at a critical junction. It's the lifeblood of communities. When you look at it, and sometimes being outside the UK is good. So when I sit here in Boston and look at it, no other sport has the connection with the community that our great game does. It provides the social hub. It's probably the biggest thing that people think about every week. It provides activities for children. And while Neil's on, who runs our trust, we provide all kinds of activities for people who are old, not as old as me, let's say disabled. Sometimes unfortunate, we've had walk-in football, we've had people who've been in prison. It's a major, major part of the social fabric of towns and cities in this country. It's got a rich tradition, but has a very fragile future. Well done, Luke. Without some action being taken place. In short, as it says on this slide, the national game's under threat. You only have to look at what's happened to various clubs. I mean, I had an update today on Derby. I don't think Derby's going to get done anytime soon. And it's got a very complicated situation. But we know the other clubs that have been in trouble. The Tracy Crouch report, which was this report the government set up that we're talking about, actually mentions Leyton Orient and what happened to us. It talks about Bolton. And by the way, Bolton are doing a great job. And, I was talking to someone who's been at Bolton fairly recently, and they had to repay all their debts, but they're coming out of it. And congratulations to them. There's the Berries, the Macclesfield, and there's other clubs out there. And I do know there's a lot of clubs just hanging on by their nails to survive. So football's at a critical junction. And what we're going to do is I'm going to do 2 slides and Danny's going to do 2. But the first thing I wanted you to understand is that we really are at a point in time when change is needed. Over to you, Danny.
Thank you, Nigel. Yeah, the game is in need of urgent repair. I think it was a line that Rick Parry used, is that football's got to hit the reset button. This is its opportunity. So, you look at the riches of the Premier League and say worth an estimated 8 billion in value. That was a year before last, almost pre-pandemic value. So you can see the value that it brings, the success of the Premier League. It is undoubtedly a huge, huge success. But as we said, that success has not yet filtered down as much as it should have done through to the pyramid, through to the grassroots. In a recent Deloitte survey, obviously I do an awful lot of work in football in terms of analysis. It was stated that clubs in the Championship, they spent a staggering 107% of their entire revenue on wages. That is a trend that's continued. It's a trend that's worryingly going up. And in 2018-19, total net losses across all of the 72 EFL clubs was nearing on 300 million. Now, that cannot continue. That cannot be sustainable. And ultimately, there are a number of clubs that are chasing that holy grail of either getting to the Premier League or trying to survive when they get to the Premier League. It's unsustainable. And in short, the game's got to change. Next slide, please, Luke. So the owners and directors test that currently exists, it has been strengthened. We listen regularly. I think all staff do, but certainly Nigel, myself, and Nick, and I know many others do, listen to the Price of Football podcast. This isn't an advert for it, but if you don't listen to it, we urge you to do it. It's twice a week on all of the various podcast channels, and it is really worthwhile listening. It's not geeky in terms of all the financial details, but it really does paint the often bleak picture of the financial outlook of football within this country, and it's well worth a listen. One of the things that they're regularly campaigning for is a stronger owners and directors test, and we fully agree with that. It has become more robust. When I look back at what it was perhaps 6-7 years ago, it was pretty weak, and I think it has been strengthened, but it needs to be, and this was part of the Tracy Crouch report, really strengthened, and it needs to be something that isn't, is what it is on the tin. It's owners and directors, but it really digs deep into trying to find, as the Price of Football calls people, wrong-uns. It's not easy to spot, but the more fast developing issues that an owner or an owners might have, the better, and the more chance that you won't have the likes of a Berry reoccurring. And so these clubs reporting these continued losses, it's almost become a wallpaper. You listen to the Price of Football podcast, this 100 million loss, Chelsea losing 150 million or whatever it is. People just take it as read and think, well, that's the norm. It shouldn't be. Football clubs shouldn't be losing these massive millions up and down the pyramid regularly. Clubs are posting 6-7 figure losses, which is, it's simply, as we know, unsustainable. Back over to Nigel.
Yeah, just following on from that, I mean, just to give you an example, Derby, my understanding is to buy the club minimum of 48 million. And there's all kinds of losses out there, everyone from the local butcher to other football clubs, and staggeringly a bill that is owed to the HMRC, I nearly said IRS, but anyway, of something like 29 million. So to buy Derby, you have to really take on a lot. And as example after example, and as Danny said, all driven, particularly in the Championship, by driving for the Holy Grail of the Premier League. So I think what this is being clearly said already is that we cannot continue. And one of the things the Tracy Crouch report, who, for those who may be wondering what kind of political affiliation she is, she's an ex-sports minister, she's a Conservative. Doesn't mean we all agree with her politics, but I would have to say the report was incredibly well done. It's very thorough, and there's been an awful lot of research and a lot of talking, particularly to fan groups. But what she talks about is integrity, transparency, and fairness, demonstrating good governance. And we at Leyton Orient believe in all that. We've tried to do it. We have regular meetings outside of the fan forums with people like Karen and Loft. So we feel that we try and uphold what is written in the report and the focus on those elements. We can always improve, and we always ask for feedback, but I think it's so critical that as a football club is a community asset, we have to find a way to make sure all clubs report. Some clubs don't even do their full reports in their company's house. Southend, I think, last reported their accounts in 2019. We pride ourselves that we try and always beat the deadline, make sure all the accounts are out there. And I think when we talk about the opposition to this, one thing I would say is most people don't know this, but in America, private companies are private. They don't have to put their accounts onto anything like Companies House. Bizarrely today, the SEC, which basically runs the financial guidelines for major companies, has actually talked about doing something like that. I'm sure it's going to get a lot of opposition. But when I first moved to America, I didn't realize that you couldn't get accounts online. So that's one good thing that happens in the UK is all those accounts are there. And as I say, we at Leyton Orient believe that you've got to be very open and transparent. If we move on to the next slide, the Tracy Crouch report, which is worth a read, as Danny said, the biggest one by far of the recommendations is setting up an independent regulator. So that will be outside the EFL, will be outside the FA, outside the Premier League by an act of Parliament. And if there's one thing that we have to lobby for, in our view, is for the IREF to be set up. It will be financed independently. It will be like several other independent regulators that exist in the UK. I'm sure I'm going to pick some bad examples like the Water Commission or whatever it's called. And again, this is a real difference from how things are run here in America. So if you see opposition for a lot of the clubs who own, like we are, by Americans, this is going to be a real difference in the way that a game is governed. There's 47 recommendations. We're not going to cover them all today, but they do talk about fan engagement, financial distribution, financial controls, who should own clubs, as Danny said. Women's football, they actually recommend there should be a separate report on that. We support that as well. Danny's touched on owners and directors tests getting tougher. A big issue is the reformation of parachute payments. This is the payments that are given to clubs that are relegated from the Premier League. Even if you cut that in half, that will be worth something like 800,000 to each club in the league. And that's doing it very conservatively. And then better support for community projects. A good example of that is I campaigned along with Danny last year that it was ridiculous that clubs like Sutton and Harrogate had to tear up their artificial pitches to come into the league. Our lawyer, Jeff Cunningham, tells us that he goes past the Harrogate ground all the time. And 2 years ago, before they were in the league, that ground was being used 18 hours a day for young people to play football on their artificial surface. So this is very much linked to the community. And I think we all agree we want young kids getting out and playing football as one of the best ways of keeping fit. Over to you, Danny.
Thank you, Nigel. So yeah, at the moment, the broadcasting revenue is nowhere near where it needs to be in terms of its distribution. The numbers are going up, and that's not just UK monies, but also overseas rights. It's the overseas rights that are typically driving the value at the moment. And we're campaigning, as are every EFL club, and as is Tracy Crouch's, one of her key proposals is that there is a 75-25% split of that broadcasting revenue. If that was to happen, and so that's the recommendation, or one of the recommendations, it would allow virtually every club in the pyramid, and certainly the vast majority of the EFL clubs, to become self-sufficient and to become sustainable, and to not have to go every single week, every single month, every single quarter, going to ask the likes of Nigel, Nick and Kent, say, we need X. You know, we should be in a position where a football club can stand on its own 2 feet, and investments then made into other areas of infrastructure, further improving fan facilities, as well as the academy. So we've also joined forces. We were one of the first clubs to proudly join Fair Game. If you haven't researched what that is or haven't heard from us before, encourage you to do it. There was a really good episode with the sort of founder of Fair Game, Niall Cooper. He appeared on the Orient Outlook podcast with Stephen Paul, worth going back, listening to that interview. But the Fair Game is effectively a movement that is pushing for a fairer game. It sounds obvious, but to develop a sustainable pyramid, to increase fan engagement. And the mirrors between the Tracy Crouch report and Fair Game are there and clear to see. The Fair Game is pushing for sustainability index, which effectively rewards clubs for doing things the right way, whether that be environmentally sustainable, financially sustainable, or fan engagement. It basically dangles the carrot, and rather at the moment you just receive the money, their proposal is there will be pots of money that will become available, but only if you're meeting certain conditions. And we welcome the vast majority, again, if not all, of those recommendations. So it's worth a visit to fairgameuk.org. Next slide, please, Luke. So what we are doing and aim to do as a club now, we pride ourselves in being one of the most engaging boards and management team and staffing team I think there is in football, and we continue to strive to be better every single day. We're obviously liaising with all our stakeholders, including the MPs, as we mentioned earlier. We had a fantastic meeting when Nigel was last over with the leader of Waltham Forest Borough Council and some of his senior staff, and said that they are very keen to help, not just support the club in this, but to help this initiative and do everything they can. We want to make our fan engagement a little bit more of a formalised, and by that I don't mean as in making it stuffy, but to make it more rigid in terms of the scheduling. So we're looking to do quarterly meetings with Loft and the supporters clubs. We do that at the moment. We want to make sure that that's scheduled in, and I think we're due the next one of those probably in the next few weeks. And that effectively just goes through the headline strategies, financial headlines, and any queries that they've got, as well as their members. And then our plan is to continue every 4 months with our fan forum, an open Q&A with Nigel, myself, and soon my replacement, along with 1 or 2 board members like you've got, Nick, tonight, plus Martin, Kenny, player, etc. We want to increase our engagement, not decrease it. And we appreciate that there are many clubs that don't do the level of what we're doing, but yeah, we'll continue to strive to do better. And one of the things that we think is key is being able to respond to people's queries, concerns. And we've introduced in recent weeks a 1 working day email response. So whatever your query, we endeavour to come back, and we're committed to publishing all of our full accounts online, and not just to shareholders. That we're hoping we'll be able to announce our end of June 2021 financial results in the coming early spring period. And we also, as we did at the start of this season, is to publish our objectives on and off the pitch and to be transparent as we can. So whatever that target is, we plan on sharing those as we move forward each year in the same way that we did this year. Nigel. You're on mute.
Continuing Danny's list, sorry about that. We want to continue the work that we started this year with the academy and women's girls football. We've cranked up the Twitter access to that. I think we can do more. Obviously, COVID has been a little bit of an interrupter there, because we'd like a lot of people to go and see those games. And obviously there's been some restrictions, so that needs to grow. We need to expand. And as I said before, Neil is kind of the leader of this, our community outreach programs. We see Leyton Orient as a major part of the Waltham Forest community, but we also want people to think of it as part of their community, even beyond Waltham Forest. And if you actually look at where all our fans come from, a lot of them come from Essex, but a lot of people also travel from a long way away. So we have to recognize that our fans are around the country and around the world, and we have to become parts of those communities as well. But the focus is on Waltham Forest. That's where we live, that's where we want to be, and that's where we enjoy being. Responsive social media engagement, I think we're working very hard at this. It's funny, I was on one of my public boards this week, I was talking about the amount of work that social media causes, and it's very tough to keep up with it because there's so many different avenues, but we're trying very hard. And then we've got some work to do. We've got some work to do on equality and diversity, or often called D&I. I'd say that we've got a long way to go on that. But at various times we've had success. At the end of last year, we had both a head coach and an assistant head coach who were black. Or I think it's called BAME over there. And I think we need to build up our female representation at the club as well. Just concluding this section, as I always do, to share the general financials. We expect this year to lose between 1.5 and 1.8 million. That is broadly in line with our budget, but is not good enough. Going back to what Danny said, that's why making clubs sustainable and changing the share is something that is absolutely critical. On the next slide, reducing those losses. We talked earlier about a fairer distribution of broadcasting revenue. from the Premier League down the pyramid. I think you'll find that the Premier League is going to continue to grow its revenue around the world, and good luck for them. What we're asking for is a share of that. I think the EFL, and we've said this to them continually, can do a better job themselves trying to promote the game. There's a lot of games that are shown, for instance, in America on ESPN Plus. I don't think that's marketed. I don't think people really understand what the EFL is. So there's a lot of work that we've suggested needs been doing on that. It was actually interesting at the weekend, not the EFL, but the FA Cup. You could see just about every game, and you could go from game to game to game. I'm sure Nick did it like I did. And I think that was an example of what could be done in the future. And everyone seems to be getting into sports now, because if you look at broadcasting, the Holy Grail isn't drama, films. The Holy Grail is live, things that are live, be it the insurrection on January the 6th, be it natural disasters around the world. But the thing that people most regularly go for is live sports, whatever sport it is. And we've got a great product that, unlike many other sports, don't last 3 or 4 hours or even days in the case of cricket. And I think a lot more can be done to really activate more financial rewards. And as an example of expanding the reach, today Apple came out and said that they were looking at showing Major League Baseball games next season. So there's a lot more people getting into the sports business, because it is the place to see something that's live. And the only time to see it, with the advent of social media and the internet, is to see it as it happens. I think we also need to recognize that we need to control our costs. And I think the biggest problem, particularly in the Championship, is there's been zero cost control. Last year, we tried very hard to get a salary cap. As you probably all recall, that got removed halfway through the season through a lack of consultation with the PFA, Professional Footballers Association. I've touched on hybrid or synthetic pitches, and we at Leyton Orient are very keen, not on a synthetic pitch, but a hybrid pitch. And then one of the things that Tracy Crouch actually talked about is a trial of at-seat drinking. And this would, in our view, probably bring in 200,000-300,000 a year to Leyton Orient. It's the only sport where it's not allowed because of history. So we think there's a lot that's going to come out of this, and the trial would be in League Two and the National League. I can't remember. Did I do 2 slides there, Danny, or is this your one?
Back over to me, please. So yeah, most of there we've just covered. It's just that bottom one. So we are launching a number of initiatives that really do drive forward our environmental sustainability. It's something that we just about launched in March 2020, and then decided to pause for obvious reasons, because we didn't sadly have any fans at the Briar Group Stadium. But this will be one of my main projects that I'll be leading in the next 2 months or so, and then passing the reins over to who comes in for me. But the team are working very hard on this alongside the trust as well, to truly not just be a tick box exercise, but to truly do our part for the environment. Next slide, please. Okay. So we obviously have explained an awful lot. Now, the really key thing with this is the next call, the call to action that we want to stress to every fan watching this live or watching it back in catch up on the YouTube channel, etc., is that now is the time for action. The Tracy Crouch report was published in November, obviously with the Christmas break, and there's been obviously other headlines, should we say, dedicated in addition to the Omicron variant. But we would like every single fan to take a moment over the next few days or next week or so to visit the website. You'll clearly see there's a section on there in relation to the fan-led review, and to write to their local MP. And so we cannot stress enough that MP John Cryer is massively behind this, as are the council. But we're mindful that our fan base is spread fairly wide. There's a number of fans I know live in Essex, in Hertfordshire, in Kent, etc., etc. So wherever your MP is based, we really, really encourage you to find that letter There's a template on there that you can adapt as you like, and obviously put the name on there, and then to contact your local MP with that. The more people that will do that, the more MPs will realise how important football is. There are large chunks of this country that don't necessarily have a football club on their doorstep. So, for example, Cornwall or other parts of other counties. But it's really important you play your part, and truly football can change and become a fairer game for all, and to develop sustainability. So all of those links will be on our social media channels as well as our website. And Jake and Luke and others have all pulled those together to make that as easy as we can. So please continue to read up on it and to write to your MP, and the letter template is there. I'm now going to quickly hand over to Nick Seneca. Mr. Wants to get to sustainability, is what I'd like to call Nick, because that's his drive, is to make sure that we're getting to break even as quick and as fast as we can, and that's to be applauded. So I'm just going to hand over to Nick now, please.
All right. Is there another slide you want me to go through, Danny? Here.
No, this is just you verbally, if that is okay, please, Nick. So I think if we leave the slides for now, please, Luke.
I think it's sustainability to me is the number one priority of the club, and all of us are fans of the club, but we have a different job as well, which is to be responsible. And there have been too many clubs who have spent too much money. We mentioned Derby earlier as maybe the most recent example, and then the money runs out, and all of a sudden the club is either wound up or threatened with winding up. And we can't do that here, plain and simple, right? Nigel talked about our finances, and the good news is we're on target. The bad news is the target means we're still losing a ton of money. So we are starting a process looking at just about every area, both on the revenue side and the cost side. As many of you guys know, I've owned a baseball team in the United States. There are no home runs, as we call them here. It's a lot of different pieces about being smarter about your expenditure. For example, we're looking at some energy efficiency projects at the Brayer Group Stadium. So I'm pretty excited about it because it has to happen. If we lose 1.5 million pounds a year for the next 10 years, we got trouble. So we got to close that gap. I'm happy to be a part of it, and you should know that we're all working to make sure this club, as Nigel likes to put it, will last another 100 years.
Nick, thank you. So I think that concludes our presentation. So Luke, I'm going to pass back to you, I think, because we've got Loft and Leighton Orient Supporters Club coming up, right?
Yes. A bit more confusing now. I've got two screens going on. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that. I think you'd probably hand over now to Jonathan from Loft. Jonathan, if you want to start with a few questions from your point of view, and then we'll look at some from social media as well.
Certainly. Thanks, Luke. I'm actually going to first of all take up Nigel's invitation right at the start of this meeting to correct him. Loft wasn't actually formed to avert disaster at the club under the previous owner. We just found ourselves in that position 5 years ago. We've actually been around for 20 years now, and our purpose, like all supporters trusts, is to represent the interests of Leighton Orient fans in a healthy, balanced and constructive relationship between the club, its supporters and the communities it serves. We are hugely supportive of all the recommendations in the report. We've campaigned for the past 5 or so years in particular for an independent regulator and a club licensing system ever since it was obvious to us that governance of football was broken and that the likes of the EFL are unable to regulate football clubs. I actually represented Loft at one of the Tracy Crouch review sessions, the information gathering sessions, and I wasn't the only contributor overall to have quoted the EFL's habit of stating, "We're just a competition organizer." So yeah, we're hugely supportive of this report and its recommendations. For us at Loft, supporter engagement is at the heart of what we're about. So some of the things that haven't been touched on so far are some of the proposals around supporter engagement the golden share, which is referred to as a recommendation, which would give fans a right of veto over changes to heritage items such as the club's name, the club badge, the home kit colour, and so forth. And also the proposal for a shadow board, which looks like an evolution of the quarterly meetings with Loughton and Supporters Club that Nigel referred to earlier. So overall, I don't think there's anything here to fear for a club like Leyton Orient in terms of the supporter engagement. As Nigel has said, you know, the club has a hugely engaged board when it comes to engaging with the fans. It already has supporter engagement as one of its key focuses. So I don't really have any questions on this, but I just want to really state that we stand full square behind this report, that the call to action to lobby MP, whatever your political affiliation, whoever your MP is, it's hugely important that we get cross-party, cross Houses of Parliament backing for this proposal, and that the inevitable lobbying by Premier League clubs is squashed as much as possible by those in power.
Thank you, Jonathan. We've got a few questions in from the week for this one. So I just want to start with one to you, Nigel. And it might be kind of repeating what we've said so far, but Sean's asked, as someone who's unfamiliar with football governance jargon, can you outline the top line impacts for Leyton Orient and the supporters? So I guess if you can, just maybe a brief sentence or so about what exactly this is about and why it's so important.
Okay, so I'll try and do that. So basically, there is concern that football clubs, which are a major community asset, and I think Loft, by the way, have led the way to make Leyton Orient a community asset. I'll just pause there, Jonathan. That is correct this time, right?
We've certainly done our best. We certainly were the organisation that was able to put in the form to have the Bray Group Stadium recognised as an asset of community value, as it's called. First of all, when we initially did that, and then when it came up for renewal, we've done that again. So the stadium has a level of protection around its community value.
Yeah, and what that means, so just to bring it back to brass tacks, which I think is the purpose of the question, is, you know, I think everyone knows that the ground is owned by Barry Hearn's Matchroom pension fund. If they wanted to sell the ground to put houses on, the now golden share that Jonathan touched on would come into play, because one of the things that's listed in the report is that the selling of grounds have to have the golden share approval. So that makes it very difficult for clubs, and Derby is a good example, who basically sold the ground from the club to another asset within Mel Morris's portfolio. So I think this is a good move. But, and don't forget, I start as a fan, because I was a fan before I became the chairman, and I think we all want sustainability. So, you know, that's a very important point. The second thing in terms of governance, I think it's avoiding a situation whereby, let me take an example. A chairman who puts the money in makes decisions on his own. I actually, because I've got some pretty good contacts here, talked again about Derby. All the decisions they made at Derby were basically made by one or two people. Our board, for instance, has 8 people on. They're very vocal in what they think about things. And that gives us what is called check and balance. That means that you have a check on what you're doing. So the Tracy Crouch report is putting in place more controls like that. But the biggest things is the redistribution of some of the broadcast money that comes into the Premier League. And it's interesting that when the Premier League was set up in 1992, there was a proposal to give the EFL 25%, which is what they're asking for now. At the time, it was turned down because broadcasting meant nothing in those days. I mean, at that time, I remember living in Miami, and the only way I ever got the Orient score was by my dad sending me a fax. I mean, I couldn't listen to it on the radio. I couldn't watch it on the TV. I couldn't go on the internet. I had to get a fax. So the 25% in 1992 is very different from now. Football is a big business. And a point that hasn't been made earlier is the Premier League will push back on this. I mean, you've seen a lot of clubs already pushing back. Interestingly, I read an article just before this that Manchester United apparently are very supportive, which is good. But I think one of the things we have to recognize is that clubs in the Premier League are going to push back at this. And you asked the question, why? Well, they're going to get pushed to share some of the Premier League money with people like us. Now, I would argue that the first place to start is the parachute payments, which Danny will correct me this time, I think was in the last year, 210 million. Think about that, 210 million given to the 3 clubs that leave the Premier League. So hopefully I've made it simple, but the bottom line is the independent regulator will make sure that football is managed in a way that is sustainable, represents the community interests, and progresses in a way that is good for the country, the local communities, and most of all clubs at every level.
Thanks, Nigel. We'll probably stay with you for a couple of these. One of them was about the golden share again, if I can find it. Well, actually, we'll start with a slightly broader question. It was a question from Jamie. He's asked, were you not initially skeptical of an independent regulator, and what has brought about the board and your change in mind in that?
Okay, so as always, our fans never forget anything. So I think that's true. I think we were because, you know, do people want to be regulated by outsiders? I think so. I think we've changed our mind. And by the way, so's the EFL. We haven't said this already, but Rick Parry, remember he was the first CEO of the Premier League, and Trevor Crouch, who helped us buy the club. Not Trevor Crouch. Trevor Birch. Sorry, getting my names muddled up. They're right behind this. So we've all changed our mind. And I think we see the bigger picture. The more disasters that happen in football. I mean, think about it this year. There's been several clubs that have had issues with their financials. Several clubs have signed players that they shouldn't have done, and they've been deducted points. That is not a good system. So absolutely spot on. We've changed our minds. The independent regulator will be someone who has a group of people that can stand outside the issues. And if someone has breached the regulations, they can be punished quickly. I mean, it's quite interesting that the Derby situation, and many of you will remember last year, had this situation about whether Derby or Wycombe should go down. It went on nearly all summer. If there had been an independent regulator, hopefully that could have been resolved far quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. The follow-up to that question was just about whether you think that governance in football has improved in the 5 years that you've been in charge of the club.
Can you say that again?
Now you've been in charge of the club for going on 5 years. Do you think that the governance of the game has improved?
Yeah, in bits. I mean, I think I'm skeptical. I'll get Karen or Jonathan to talk about this as well. The owners and directors test has probably gone from being a -1 to 1 out of 10. So that's probably improved. I think the leadership of the EFL is better. I think one of the things that happened in COVID is we had these monthly meetings where we all got to know each other. And it may be a surprise to most people that I think one of the good things in football is we all basically get on. I mean, some of my best friends are, like the chairman of, don't shout at me, chairman of Stevenage, the chairman of Northampton. I mean, they're very good friends of mine. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, we're all trying to move the game forward. But I think it's marginal. I think it needs a big shake-up. So I think we've got a long way to go. I mean, before Jonathan goes, Nick, you looked at a lot of football clubs before joining us. What do you think? about that question?
Well, I don't have the context in terms of how it was, back in the past. I will say what's noticeable in the U.S. The U.S. has a lot of flaws, and our sports have a lot of flaws. But I got to tell you, in the successful leagues like the National Football League, there is a lot of centralized control, so that equitable decisions are made, and situations like the Derby Wickham one that Nigel just talked about don't happen. And they don't do everything right, but to me, it's the fact that the leagues haven't taken the ball to police their game, police our game, and instead, there's been bad characters allowed. They break the rules, and the mechanisms for resolving those are not good. Whereas in the States, it's a very centralized. Now, it's not done by the government because the leagues themselves do it, but it's a very important part of having a situation where all the clubs are healthy. So I do think that's something that's notable, and that's one reason why I think that kind of regulation is required in England.
I think it's interesting. You raised a really interesting point. In the National Football League, all the owners vote on a new owner coming in. So, for instance, if the Philadelphia Eagles ownership changed, all the other owners have to vote on it. Now, I'm not sure that's a good system when you've got between the Premier League and the EFL 92 clubs, because there's probably that would not work. But the independent regulator would make sure that there is fair practice right across the piece. Jonathan, what do you think about
that? To answer the original question, governance, no, has not really improved in the 5 years. You look at what's happened at Bury, you look at what's happened at Macclesfield, you look at what's happening now at Oldham, where you have a club whose fan base is facing almost exactly the same set of problems that the Orient fan base faced 5 years ago. Governance has not stopped any of those things happening, and it won't until there's an independent regulator. Just as an aside, talk about Oldham, the Push the Boundary fan group there are holding a protest before our game with them on Saturday at 2:00. They hugely appreciate the support of Orient fans at the home fixture against them earlier in the season, and they would love the support of any O's fans who are going to the game on Saturday. But fundamentally, no, governance won't improve until this review's recommendations are implemented in full.
Karen, you got any comments on that?
Yeah, I'd agree with Jonathan, and I'd just say that until we've got a regulator that's actually got some teeth and is actually able to bite the backsides of the people that are trying to pull the wool over the eyes, then nothing really is going to change. So yeah, fully back this independent regulator.
Karen. We'll pick up on one piece here. It's a question Les Kay's asked on YouTube, and it's a bit of opens up a broader area, which is about live broadcasting. And Nigel, obviously, we met with EFL not too long ago to talk about streaming and broadcasting. And the question here is that Sky rarely show League Two games on live broadcast, and you can look at the fixtures that gone out again today, and I don't think there's any League Two teams in the broadcast. So is there a case for having an agreement with a channel like Quest to broadcast our league separately? So obviously we spoke about that in quite a bit of detail and why that pretty much can't happen under the current agreement.
Well, yeah, there's all kinds of agreements that start. I'll try and keep it simple. There's all kinds of agreements that come from UEFA about 3:00 kickoffs, or in fact, the actual window, Danny will correct me this time, is I think 1:45 to 4:15 or something like that. And what that means is that you can't show live games at that time. In our research for that meeting that Luke talked about, we found that the only countries that seem to obey that are Bosnia-Herzegovina and Scotland, wasn't it? I think there was two of them, as well as the UK. So I think there's a chance that's going to go away. The Premier League apparently are anti taking that away because they're concerned about people not coming to their games. I personally think that's a backwoodsman's view of looking at it. And we said to the EFL, there's a lot of research that shows that you will still get people turning up to the games because it's the live atmosphere, it's the environment, and the football experience isn't just watching the game. It's turning up with your mates, it's having a drink. By the way, ideally at Leighton Orient, not the pub down the road, just for everyone who's watching. And the banter that goes with it, the post-game experience, and you know, it's a whole day out for some people. And I want to compliment all the Orient fans who went to Stoke and were spectacular. They could not have been better. And I know the players and the coaches supported it, but that was a day out. I mean, I didn't go because I'm here, but David, my son, who you all know, he went with some of his friends, had a fantastic time. And I thought we played great, a bit unlucky. But that's what football's about. It's an experience. It isn't. And over here, it's the same with American football. You go and you tailgate before the game. So it's not just a football game. Yeah, we can stream it. And no one's a bigger advocate of streaming than me, because I remember watching, waiting for years to be able to watch the games, and now we got it. But I think we can get more money out of it. We'll still get people turning up to the games. And I know some people disagree with that, but we have to get more money coming into football to build the strength of all our clubs.
Cheers, Nigel. Looking at questions we've had in again, I think we'll probably have a couple more before we finish up. One in from Darren. I'm going to skip to the last part of it. We talked about, again, it's be one of you, Nigel. We spoke about drinking and drinking in view of the game. Some people have opposed that. The club openly kind of backed that. Danny, this might extend to you as well, but there was a bit of negative kind of reaction to the club's stance on it, about maybe potential the game experience, about how it could negatively impact it as well. So I just wanted to know if the club has kind of updated their stance on it, if they've taken on any of the feedback from fans, and what the position on it is.
Should I go first on that one, Nigel? So yeah, we support the trial, and the purpose of a trial is to trial it and to understand what works, what doesn't. There might be grounds where it does work, and there'll be grounds where it doesn't work. There'll be areas of the ground where it works, and there'll be areas that don't. So we very much support that trial. Whether it will happen this season, I don't know. But you know, I think we can say now that we would have to make sure that the family nature of our club was above all else protected. And the minute someone misbehaves, it applies now. If someone comes in having had 10 pints up the high road, they won't get in the stadium. And if they misbehave in the stadium, they will be very quickly ejected from it. So that principle will remain. And the reality is, we think that adults, fans, those over 18, should be able to enjoy a sociable drink or two in the comfort of their seat, and being able to do that in you know, the same crowd can go and do that and go and watch a cricket game 10 miles down the road at Essex, or can go and watch a rugby game and do exactly the same. I know football is different, it's tribal, it's passionate, and that is why we welcome the trial, and we will review and gather all feedback as and when that happens.
Cheers, I think that's probably us coming towards the end of our questions. One of the ones we've had a few times, which sadly Martin isn't here to answer, is, are we going to sign anyone in January? But we might have to leave that one for a little bit further down the line.
Okay, well, no, let me talk about that, because I think it's important. I mean, again, I'm a fan first, so I think it's important that, I mean, I think we got ourselves into a good position. Could we have had less draws? Undoubtedly. Have we got a good squad? Yes. Kenny basically said we need a bit more depth, and I think the injury to Tom James, who had a successful operation, by the way, is a good example. I'll be surprised if we don't bring in at least 3 players, based on some pretty good knowledge. One of the things that's weird about the window, it changes every day. You know, you'll have a meeting on a Monday, and by Tuesday, someone else has become available because someone else has signed someone else, and on it goes. But I think we know where we need strengthening. I think that's been well communicated by Kenny, and I'm hoping that we get that moving as soon as possible. And you should also know that the board are looking at paying some money for players, because one of the things that I think I shared last time is we believe that if we get our talent analysis and recruitment right, there are players we can bring in not only to strengthen our squad, but to find ways of making money down the road. We've done that before. Recent examples of Macaulay Bonne and Josh Koroma, who I understand is not going to re-sign at Huddersfield, so we may get some more money there. But I think when we did our financial plan earlier last year for the new investors, we put no money in for making money on selling players. I think we will do that. So the whole recruitment of players is a major thing we're working on. There's a lot of time and effort going into it, but the bottom line is we will strengthen the squad.
Thank you, Nigel. I think that will probably be a nice moment to end on. Just to clarify once again, for everything you've read today, you can see it on the Leyton Orient website. It's under a new tab on the left saying fan-led review, or you can just type in leytonorient.com/fan-led review. There's also a template in there for you to send out to your MPs to back the process. You can also revisit the slides from today. And then if there's anything else to add in there as time goes along, we'll add it to that part as well. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone that's joined us this evening for the Q&A, and we look forward to speaking to you all again soon in another Q&A in some fashion.